Douglas Fairbanks, Part 3. The Three Musketeers was released in 1921. Based on the classic novel by Alexandre Dumas, Fairbanks played the hero D'Artagnan, who he had briefly portrayed in 1917's A Modern Musketeer. The story concerns D'Artagnan trying to join the King's Musketeers and befriending three of the Musketeers along the way, and finding adventure and love, and eventually becoming the fourth Musketeer. Since Doug was the producer and the writer, he was able to lighten Dumas' hero a lot and make him less of a deliberate fight picker and more of a social justice hero like his previous characters had been. According to Jeffrey Vance, this slight adjustment to the character made him much more likable and closer to the new Fairbanks formula as seen in Zorro. Naturally, the Three Musketeers contain several sword fight scenes. If I forgot to mention it, previously in all of his films, Doug always did all of his own stunts, including the acrobatics, leaps, and other dangerous actions. Take a look at this fight from the film. Many film historians list Doug's left-handed handspring as one of the greatest stunts of the silent film era, if not the greatest. But The Three Musketeers contains more than adventures and stunts. In my opinion, it contains some of Doug's strongest romantic work. Look at the scene where he's professing his love to Constance, who's played, again, by Marguerite de la Motte. There's a level of romantic sincerity that I've not seen in his other silent films that perfectly captures the heroic and romantic spirit of Dumas' hero and makes him all the more interesting to watch in his adventurous fight scenes, because he's fighting for this love. The Three Musketeers was tied with Agnes Ayres and Valentino's The Sheik as the third most grossing film of 1921, making $1.5 million at the box office, around $25 million in 2023. I'm sorry, for now, as soon as I've been talking about this, all I hear is that song, One for All and All for Love, that Sting and Rod Stewart and Bryan Adams recorded for The Three Musketeers that came out when I was a child in 1995. But I digress. The Exhibitor's Herald wrote, good movie. The Exhibitor's Herald wrote, in The Three Musketeers, Douglas Fairbanks set a mark for stars to shoot at. If you thought The Three Musketeers was the biggest hit of Doug's career thus far, you'd be right. But it was immediately eclipsed by his next film, 1922's Robin Hood, which was the #1 movie of 1922, making $2.5 million, around $45 million today. And let me say really quickly before I move on, I love that song by Sting and Rod Stewart and Bryan Adams. It's just in my head as I'm talking about The Three Musketeers, which is kind of cool. Back to Robin Hood. This film was Doug's adaptation of the classic story of the man that stole from the rich and gave to the poor, which fell into the formula that Doug had been building since Zorro. But again, the film wasn't simply just a Fairbanks Formula One or simply an exciting adventure. Doug demonstrated that he was still an extremely talented actor underneath all the tights and sword fights. Take a look at this scene. Immediately, Doug enters the shot as Robin Hood. From head to toe, it is clear that he's become this classic hero. From his cocky laugh to his noble stance he gives as he agrees to help the lady in distress, it's clear Doug has committed 100% again to his character. Some modern critics have commented on the exaggeration of Doug's acting. While that is true to some extent, I still think that there is always more beneath the surface. All of his characters, whether in his comedy era or his adventure era, all had their subtle, carefully constructed nuances. Robin Hood was naturally also a critical hit. Exhibitor's Herald wrote that Douglas Fairbanks works energetically and with good effect throughout the film. Except for a cameo in the film Hollywood, Doug took a break during 1923, but was still #3 at the box office. I'm assuming Robin Hood was still playing around worldwide in theaters. But Doug wasn't actually taking a break for very long. He was writing, producing, and meticulously creating an entire city for his next epic production, his most epic production to date, 1924's The Thief of Baghdad. According to film historian Janine Basinger, having dazzled audiences with his enormous sets for Robin Hood, Fairbanks chose to outdo himself for his Arabian Nights movie. Working with William Cameron Menzies, he oversaw the construction of a city with domes and minarets, a place of enormous size and tiny streets with archways, bridges, stairways, and passageways to nowhere that seemed to rise up, and away into the very heavens themselves. Many modern film historians and critics have cited The Thief of Baghdad as the greatest silent film of all time and Doug's greatest work. While it was obviously expensive to make and had a budget over $1 million in 1924, it ended up making $2 million profit and was the fourth highest grossing film in 1924. Inspired by 1001 Nights, the classic story, Thief followed Ahmed, an Aladdin-type character that steals as he sees fit and leeches off others in Baghdad. He gets himself mixed up in plenty of adventures and eventually falls in love with a princess played by Julianne Johnston. I definitely agree with historians that it's probably the most visually pleasing of Doug's films, and what a spectacle it is. You won't find a more beautiful set anywhere in silent film except for maybe DeMille's The Ten Commandments. But what struck me about Thief was, per usual, Doug's performance. This time, I particularly noticed his return to the dance-like movement that had come to define some of his earlier film physicality. In this clip, where he cleverly engineers a means to get to a balcony to steal some food, the exact precision in which he times all of his movements, particularly those of his arms, are all but choreographed. Even the moment he digs his hand into the bowl of rice is perfectly timed. I could easily see Doug translating this performance into a staged ballet. Of course, Doug once again commits 100% to the part physically and emotionally like only he could, with the perfect mixture of subtle emotion and strong physical expression. In addition to being a commercial smash, it once again was a critical one, too. The New York Times praised Doug's energy and agility and said that you can see this film and look forward to seeing it a second time. 1925 saw Doug make a sequel to Zorro, this time entitled Don Q, Son of Zorro, which was another commercial and critical smash. He entered 1926, having been number 5 at the box office, and released his first pirate film, which I'm surprised took him that long to make, The Black Pirate. In his first and only pirate film, sadly, Doug played the title character, who vows vengeance on the pirates that killed his father and infiltrates a group of pirates, eventually usurping their leader in a sword fight and taking his place, before defending a lady played by the great Billy Dove, experiencing betrayal and mutiny and eventually revealing himself to be a royal duke. It had all the ingredients to make a successful adventure film. Pirates, sword fighting, epic battle scenes, love, some technicolor sequences, and of course, Douglas Fairbanks. Take a look at this epic sword fight scene where Doug is severely outnumbered but is more than prepared to defeat each and every last one of his enemies. The Black Pirate was the second most successful film in 1926 and made around $2 million that year, around $34 million today. It also was another critical favorite. The New York Times wrote that Mr. Fairbanks seems more active than ever. He goes through fighting stunts with the same cheerfulness that he did in other productions. He is ever in keeping with the character and reflects a smiling mood in most of the sequences. Doug released The Gaucho in 1927, which was essentially another Zorro or Robin Hood type film about a bandit that comes to the rescue of a city under siege by evildoers. Doug played the title character, and his leading lady this time was Lupe Velez, a mountain girl who was exploited by the evildoers for her healing powers. While the plot was standard Doug rescues another city, the Gaucho character was more roguish, more dangerous. According to Doug's biographer, Jeffrey Vance, the spirit of adolescent, boyish adventure has been replaced by a spiritual fervor and an element of seething sexuality, the likes of which have never been seen before in one of his productions. I agree. Take a look here at the Gaucho as he boisterously drinks, demands more wine, and tries to seduce the mountain girl. He's aggressive and not the gentleman he usually is in his other pictures. While the Gaucho is not a villain, he's no saint. But Lupe's character is also the first time the damsel in distress that he saves is also just not demure and helpless. No pun intended, she's a Spitfire, who matches the Gaucho's volatile energy. It's hard to tell sometimes who is trying to tame who. It was an interesting new type of picture for Doug and also made over $1 million at the box office and was critically praised. Doug moved into 1929 ready to enter the world of talkies. He spared no expense in his last silent film, The Iron Mask, a sequel to The Three Musketeers that ended D'Artagnan's story and gave the world one last swashbuckling Fairbanks adventure. It was another well-received commercial smash, but most importantly, it had a talking introduction by Fairbanks himself that allowed audiences the chance to hear his stage-trained voice for the very first time. Here it is.
Out of the shadows of the past, as from a faded tapestry of time's procession slow and vast, I step to bid you bear with me, the while your fancy I engage, to look upon another age, an age when on the human tide the plumed wave of chivalry rose to its summit, sweeping wide across a nation's mighty sea. France never shone a brighter power than in this high, romantic hour. So come with me to France of old, to fiery days when hearts beat high, when blood was young and hate was bold, and sword crossed sword to do or die. For love and honor gloried then, and friendship reached its peak with men. Friends were friends in those brave days. Athos, Porthos, Aramis, aye, graved our hearts with a mystic phrase, bound our lives with a mystic tie. Come, stir your soul with our ringing call of all for one, and one for all. Come on, come on!